and this is Australians Take Back Your Country. What I wanted to talk about tonight is what is called the Palace Letters. Palace Letters were the communications between the Governor-General of Australia, Sir John Kerr, with Buckingham Palace to the Queen. And they related in particular to the period concerning the dismissal of the Whitlam government and the calling of an election in 1975. And this became a burning issue with the Australian Republican movement, and in particular, a lady called Jenny Hocking, Professor Jenny Hocking, who got a bee in her bonnet. She believed, or she said she believed, that the Queen was implicated in the sacking, although Sir John always said he'd gone out of his way not to involve the Queen. It related to a significant event in Australian history, and that was in 1975, the Whitlam government had decided, authorised a very substantial loan to buy back a lot of foreign investment in Australia so that it would be vested in the government. And a loan was authorised through, strangely not going through the normal sources in New York and London, but going through a man who seems to be very much a carpetbagger, a man called Khemlani, whom some Labor MP met in a leagues club in Sydney, I think. And Khemlani was supposed to find the money from the Arab governments, rich Arab potentates. It was going to be hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, the authorization of that was put through the Executive Council, which is the formal body over which the Governor-General presides. Cabinet decisions are taken to the Executive Council and they're given legal effect. Curiously, it wasn't on the agenda for the meeting of the Executive Council, and the meeting of the Executive Council was held at a time when they knew Sir John Kerr, the Governor-General, would be doing something else. So in a case like that, the Vice President, who's a minister, takes over, and the motion to approve the obtaining the loan through Khemlani was put through, which was a shock. And no doubt the Governor-General was shocked when he realised that this had been done when he wasn't there. So we had an extraordinary situation, and the money never came. Rex Connor, the minister, was always looking for it. It caused such an outrage that the government withdrew the authorization to get the money, but Rex Connor still tried to get it against the government's decision. And when this came out, the opposition, led by Malcolm Fraser, who had a majority in the Senate, said that this was a reprehensible act, and they would refuse supply. They would not pass the budget bills until the government agreed to advise the Governor-General to call an election. So they held a gun, as it were, to Mr. Whitlam's head. The situation when this happens is very clear. In 1974, when a similar thing happened, Mr. Whitlam immediately advised a general election, which he just won. The last time it happened in Britain was in 1909, when the House of Lords still had the power to reject budgets, and they rejected a budget. And the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, H.H. Asquith, immediately went to the King and advised a general election, which he just won. And it happened a few times in Victoria. Victoria seemed to rather have a number of these cases where an upper house said, look, we're not happy with the government. We won't give you the money to govern. Now, supply means that the Parliament has approved the use of the tax monies collected by the government, the use of them for the purpose of the government. And what was happening was that the money was beginning to run out. And instead of going to the Governor-General and advising a general election, Gough Whitlam continued to hold out. Fraser, who was as obstinate as Whitlam was, continued to refuse to grant supply. And we were facing a situation where government contracts would not be paid, government contractors would not be paid, the public service would not be paid, pensions would not be paid, particularly to those who needed the money. The situation was reaching a terrible situation where the government was about to run out of money, and the Governor-General had to act. And the Governor-General on the 11th of November received Mr. Whitlam. Mr. Whitlam, instead of recommending a general election, and he would have been entitled to a double dissolution because of the requirements of double dissolutions being satisfied, the Senate having disapproved some legislation, he could have had a double dissolution. That is, the whole Parliament goes to an election. Alternatively, his constitutional duty would have been to resign and say to the Governor-General, look, I can't govern, I can't provide supply to the government is collapsing, I will resign and you choose a caretaker Prime Minister. Well, he didn't do that. What he recommended, and he must have known that what he was recommending was not viable, he recommended a half-Senate election. Now, in a half-Senate election, the governors have to agree to issue the writs, and a number of state governments had indicated they would advise their governors not to issue the writs. And even if they did, even if a half-Senate election were held, the senators would not take their seats for another 8 months because the Senate has fixed terms. And the new senators would not take their seats until the 1st of July in the following year. And we're talking about November. There's a period of 8 months. Supply would have still run out. It was no answer. The Governor-General said to Mr. Whitlam, you refuse to recommend or advise a general election. I am therefore withdrawing your commission, which he did. He had the papers ready and he handed over a letter indicating that he would withdraw Mr. Whitlam's commission as Prime Minister. He called Mr. Fraser, the opposition leader, to become caretaker Prime Minister, to take no policy decisions, to merely be in office there to advise the calling of an election and to just maintain the running of the government. And that's what Mr. Fraser did. And an election was called within 3 weeks, and it was left to the people of Australia to decide the issue. Now, what has been argued in recent years by Jenny Hocking, on no evidence whatsoever, that there would be in those letters, which were in the National Archives. Previously, these had been treated as the personal property of the Governor-General. All previous Governors-General had treated them as their personal property, and this was accepted. Sir John Kerr had them put in the National Archives with instructions that they be released at a date in the future. And that date in the future had to be negotiated between the Governor-General's office and the palace, and that there was an agreement that these be released in 2027, subject to final approvals. In other words, in 7 years' time. Professor Hocking got lawyers to appear for her. She went to the federal court, she lost there. She went to the Federal Appeals Court, she lost there again. And then she sought special leave to appeal. Now, the High Court doesn't hear every case. In fact, they only hear about 10% of the cases coming to them. For some reason, they decided to hear this case. They knew the real issue wasn't whether these were Commonwealth records. They knew the real issue was there was something there which would be the silver bullet which would deliver a republic. Well, they won in the High Court by a majority. The archives went through them. They put them onto the internet, and they were released on the 14th of July. Somebody must have been having a joke when they released them on the 14th of July, because that was Bastille Day, the day of the French Revolution. Surely they could have released them on another day. Anyway, they were released on the 14th of July. And they showed that the Queen was unaware, that she was surprised. So John Kerr deliberately took the decision to dismiss Mr. Whitlam without telling the Queen in advance, because he didn't want to involve her. If he involved her, she would be put in a difficult position should she then advise the Prime Minister what was happening. So he didn't tell her. And he was right in deciding that, because Australia was the very first dominion under its constitution to have the powers, the executive powers, to do such things vested in the Governor-General. In other dominions, even Canada, it was delegated by the King or the Queen of the day to the Governor-General. It wasn't in the Constitution. Ours was the first to put it in the Constitution. Very clear that the Queen could do nothing. She could appoint a Governor-General, she could remove a Governor-General, but she couldn't actually herself appoint or dismiss a Prime Minister. The sole power to do that as the representative of the Crown was the Governor-General. Well, the Queen was not implicated, and it's been shown the Republicans have egg on their face. The High Court ordered costs against the National Archives, which mean we, the taxpayers, have to pay millions of dollars in costs for this folly, and not only millions of dollars in costs, but the time and attention of the three courts and the judges in being involved in all that. That's several $1 million, money down the drain, to achieve absolutely nothing. And now, of course, they're trying to argue that really there is something there, and there's absolutely nothing there. And if I could just end on this point before I come to you, Peter, Paul Kelly was the editor of The Australian in 1999, was essentially he was the commander of the Republican forces. The nominal person in charge was Malcolm Turnbull. Malcolm Turnbull tended to be rather erratic. Paul Kelly was the intellect behind changing Australia to a republic. He was the flag bearer of all the media. All the media followed The Australian at the time. And of course, the politicians. 2/3 of the politicians jumped onto the bandwagon. Labour, Liberal, even some Nationals. They all jumped onto the bandwagon. The number of politicians who came out for a no case were a small minority. A lot of the rest, a lot of the third, kept their heads below the parapet. Only a few brave politicians came out. And the result was, as you know, that 72% of electorates voted no in 1999, and every state voted no. There was no chance of the referendum getting through. But the point is, there was nothing in these papers. We've taken up an enormous amount of time. It's very big news on the 14th. The Republicans are still going ahead, but Paul Kelly has said there's been a very sad decline of the Republican movement. They're attacking the Queen, and it's completely false what they're saying. They've alienated their supporters, and they've put off the people in the middle, the rank and file voters who would be voting on the question of republic. And they should wake up to themselves that the Queen is not the issue, that the issue is whether or not we should have a republic, which doesn't seem to be on the agenda now. And I would say this, and I'll come to you immediately, Peter, because I've been talking too much. The point is that you only change your constitution if you're going to improve the governance of Australia. That part of the constitution which relates to the Governor-General, to the Queen, or to the governors works, and works very well. It's efficient. It doesn't cost a lot of money. Leave it alone, I would say, because it's working. Go to the important things which are causing the problems in Australia, which need resolution in relation to the governance of this country. Peter.
Yes, David, it's unfortunate that these lefties really want to push for this Republican to be a republic. I again just think it's very, very sad. Why can't we just concentrate and just make this country a better place? And when I mean a better place in all aspects in regards to, you know, our farming, small business, looking after our elderly, our pensioners. We've got too many people living on the streets, look after our veterans. But no, it's all about control. And obviously they wanted to try and get something on the Queen because that way, oh, gee, we can really say, well, look, we don't need her. We can really push for this republic. And becoming a republic, number one, who would you trust in there to rewrite our constitution? There's none of them in there I'd trust. Is it going to reduce our national debt? No, it's not. Is it going to get rid of the Chinese virus out of Wuhan? No, it's not. Is it going to create jobs? No, it's not. If it's not broken, nothing needs to be fixed. So as far as I'm concerned, I just wish the left would start thinking about this country and work together, and let's just make this place a better place. And that's all I've got to say on it, David.
I think you've said it so well, Peter. You've summed up, I think, the views of the overwhelming majority of Australians. And as I so often say, I think it's very true, and nobody can ever contradict me on this. Not that I'm always right, but I often say, please, can you indicate to me a significant problem in this country, which, if it weren't created by the politicians, has been made significantly worse by them. That, I think, is the problem in this country. And you've just got to go through the issues: water, agriculture, energy, all of these things, education, all of them are collapsing before our very eyes. And we are being cheated. The Australian people are being cheated. The next generation, worse, is being cheated as to making Australia the exceptional nation that the founders wanted to make it. They saw us following the United States as a great and significant power in the South. That hasn't happened because of the politicians. We really need to be attending to that problem rather than the area where the Constitution is working and working very well. Thank you very much, Peter. And remember, Australians, take back your country.
If I could just say a couple of little things, David. You're on 2GB on Wednesday nights with Michael McLaren, is that right?
Yes, it's Wednesday morning, actually.
Wednesday morning.
Yes,
all people,
very early Wednesday morning, but they are podcasts. You just go to 2GB. Michael McLaren, who's one of our up-and-coming, very brilliant commentators. Michael McLaren, 2GB, and you go to his podcast and they're there.
Very good. And just one other thing, somebody like you should be going around, it'd be an enormous job, but somebody like you should be going around to all the schools in Australia and telling the young people about our history, our constitution, because it's not being taught in our schools. And I think that is very, very sad. And on that note, I really do appreciate these conversations, David, and you look after yourself.
Thank you very much, and good evening, and advance Australia fair.
Exactly.